Buenos días.
I would like to begin by thanking the Permanent Council for the opportunity to present my candidacy this morning.
To present my candidacy today, and I'd like to greet my fellow candidates. It's good to see so many familiar faces on my screen today. Over the past few months, I've met with most of you, either in person or virtually, and I'm grateful for this second opportunity to present to you. I would like to emphasize this morning in our time together, my top 3 priorities were I to become commissioner. And then I'll close by sharing the qualities that I bring to the table, which would make me successful in accomplishing those priorities. My first set of priorities, which I believe everybody here shares, is the protection of the most vulnerable groups and of democracy itself in the context of the pandemic. This is a pivotal time for human rights in our region. The pandemic has both heightened the marginalization of vulnerable groups, and it's put immense pressure on already vulnerable democratic institutions. Infection rates, vaccination rates in many states are improving, and this is welcome, but we are not through this, and the pandemic and its effects will be a focus of the Commission over the coming period. The Commission must now pay special attention to how the pandemic has affected vulnerable groups such as women, children, migrants, indigenous people, Afro-descendant people, and LGBTQI+ individuals. Just as importantly, the pandemic has created greater pressure on democratic institutions and practices throughout our hemisphere. And let me be clear, this concern straddles the politics of the left or the right, and it straddles different regions of the Americas. The events of January 6th in the United States show that this is truly a hemispheric concern of the utmost importance. In this time of political crisis, we of course need the states of the Americas to work together through political channels, such as the OAS. But we also need a body that's independent from governments to fend for democracy as the baseline for human rights, and that does so not as a matter of politics or power, but under the mantle of our shared legal commitment to universal human rights doctrine. So the pandemic has, with its urgency, set a clear mandate: protection of those most vulnerable groups, defense of democracy. And in achieving this mandate, the Commission has to prioritize those concerns across the many different working methods that it has, across promotion and monitoring, and across cases and petition system alike, because the Commission is strongest when it has clear priorities and its different working methods are aligned. My second set of emphases or priorities have to do with the institution of the Commission itself, and in particular with procedure, transparency, workplace climate, and independence. Since being nominated, I've spent much time talking to all of you, the OAS missions, but also to civil society and other stakeholders in the inter-American system. And I've found that state and non-state users alike yearn for a system that is more procedurally and juridically rigorous and predictable, which resolves matters at a systematic pace within an adequate time frame. As commissioner, therefore, I'd prioritize that we clear the backlog and reduce the delay. Goals on which the Commission has already made great strides, and which I trust will be part of the next strategic plan, but which we need to work very hard on. And that we review and revise procedures to make sure that all procedures are systematically paced, transparent, and timely. Additionally, I would emphasize the internal working environment of the Commission, which is emerging from a challenging period. It has been wonderful to watch the new Secretary take the helm so that the Commission can begin to heal from the division of the past years. Commissioners now need to work very closely with the Secretary to support and advance her work in this direction. The Commission itself should be fair, it should be diverse, and it should be an inclusive work environment that provides a model of workplace for the region. And finally, but perhaps of the utmost importance, is the autonomy and independence of the Commission. This is something that has to be continually constructed and fought for. The past years have reminded us that the Commission has to be independent, not only from states, but also from the OAS. And this autonomy is key to the legitimacy of the Commission, and it's the highest charge of the commissioners. It would be an ongoing and central focus for me. My third set of priorities has to do with what we call universalization. When we talk about universalization of the inter-American system, we talk about all of the states of the Americas ratifying all of the instruments and submitting to the jurisdiction of the Inter-American Court. I am a staunch believer in this. There's no reason, for example, why any state should not be party to the American Convention. But I think universalization should mean more than this. The influence of the Inter-American Commission varies greatly across countries within its mandates. In some states, here I think of Argentina, Costa Rica, Colombia, the Inter-American system has a constant presence. It's felt as a recourse of last resort. It's a constant guide to policymaking. In other countries, civil society, state officials, and people on the street seem entirely unaware of the system. Universalization should also mean, then, that the inter-American system has a greater presence in those less active states. In particular, the Commission should not be satisfied with being perceived as a Latin American human rights system. It needs to have a strategy of proactive outreach with the Caribbean states, providing, for example, classes, scholarships, involving and teaching state officials of all levels. But it also needs to reach out to civil society in those places where it has less of a reach. It needs to reach out to rights-based NGOs, universities, bar associations, and make itself useful to social movements relevant to them in the Caribbean and the United States and Canada. Only through a strategy of proactive engagement with an emphasis on dialogue and promotion can the inter-American system become truly universal. I'd like to close by sharing with you what I bring to the table and why I would succeed in these sets of priorities. As it faces the region's current crises, the Commission needs commissioners who bring knowledge of the history, the politics, the law, and the instruments of the inter-American system and of our region. This is what I bring to the table. I have a doctorate and a JD from the University of California at Berkeley, and I did a postdoc at Stanford University. I'm currently a bilingual, bicultural professor of law at the University of Wisconsin, where I focus on international public law and human rights. And I'm a leading scholar of human rights in the Americas. The inter-American system has been the focus of my research over the past 15 or so years. I focus on the different ways that the states of the Americas connect to the inter-American system, differences between common law and continental traditions, but also differences within these broad traditions, because there are vast differences among all the states of the Americas in their legal traditions and their human rights practices. I understand that strengthening the inter-American system is not just a matter of ratifying treaties or issuing standards or opinions, but of actively engaging all the stakeholders through dialogue and other mechanisms, and of making the Commission useful and relevant to its audience and audiences, and above all, an effective recourse for the victims of our hemisphere's worst human rights violations. I am independent. I do not come from government or civil society, but from the more neutral terrain of the academy, where I have tenure, and that's where I would return after serving. This would make me a truly independent commissioner. Additionally, my academic focus is not on advancing any particular right or issue or cause. Rather, it has been viewing human rights as an interwoven whole, with an emphasis on how to make the institutions underlying human rights legitimate and impactful. Finally, I'm an organizational leader in my own university, having gained experiences that would make me overseeing the organizational aspects of the Commission as it moves forward in the wake of an institutional crisis of the past years. To conclude, I'll share that through my research, I've reached the conclusion that the inter-American human rights system is the most creative and formidable system of human rights protection in the world. It is a triumph of the OAS. Further, the Commission has the potential to be the most impactful human rights in the world. And my experience, my knowledge, and personal quality mean that I would be able to effectively move the Commission to meet this potential. Muchas gracias a todos por su consideración y quedo a la espera de sus preguntas. Look forward to hearing your questions.
Muchas gracias, señora Alejandra Uneo.
Thank you very much, Ms. Alejandra Neros, for your presentation. So next, we will open the floor for the questions and comments by the member states. So I would like to repeat, as we said at the beginning, that this session of the Permanent Council is open for the delegations to be able to ask questions and comments in a general nature and not directed to one specific candidate. As mentioned, the interventions should not be greater than 5 minutes, and therefore I open to the delegations the possibility to request the floor. Mr. Representative, Deputy Representative of Ecuador, Marco Ponce, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank the delegation of Ecuador, thanks the candidates for their presentations to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Ecuador, our delegation has 3 questions to the candidates. The first is, considering that the Commission monitors the general situation of human rights in the member states and publishes specific reports on this regard, what would be, in accordance to the candidates, the 3 main topics of human rights that the Commission should privilege in this period, which are as a consequence of COVID-19? The second question, bearing in mind that the Commission publishes reports on specific topics with opinion of the candidates, what is the weaknesses that the national mechanisms have to fulfill full protection of human rights of women, girls, teenagers, and what would be the role of the Commission to guarantee this? The third is, what is your criteria on publishing the commissioners of a commission and on social media on personal opinions on cases which are examined by the Commission and its implications on the impartiality of their prior decisions? Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Representative of Ecuador. I would now like to give the floor to the representative of the permanent and interim permanent representative of the United States, Brad Fritten, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. The United States would like to take this opportunity to thank you for this opportunity to hear from the candidates today, and to thank each of the candidates for sharing their unique visions and priorities for the position if elected. As you know, the United States remains a strong supporter of the IACHR and its work to promote and protect human rights in the region. It is important for the IACHR to remain an independent and autonomous body in order to carry out its mandates. The United States completed a rigorous selection process measured against 9 key criteria required to be a successful commissioner. As a result of this process, we determined that Professor Alexandra Huneeus not only met but exceeded these qualifications. As a scholar of the Inter-American system and an exceptional organizational leader, we know that she would be an asset to the IACHR if elected. Professor Huneeus is also the first Latina candidate the U.S. has put forward for the commission. She has the ability to work easily in Spanish and English and understands both major legal systems in the Americas. We hope that member states will give her candidacy careful consideration. We also recognize that Professor Huneeus is but one of 5 excellent candidates, and we take this opportunity to learn more from each of you about your unique approach to the position. My question for the candidates is this. What do you see as the greatest challenges in the region today, and how can the IACHR be most effective in meeting them? Thank you very much.
Muy agradecido.
Thank you very much. I would now like to give the floor to the representative, a permanent representative of Canada, Hugh Adsett. Please, the floor is yours.
It's a pleasure to see you this morning and the ASG, but also the candidates. And let me start by thanking the candidates for their presentations. We are fortunate to have such strong candidates before us this morning. This is quite an exceptional group of individuals. So let me express my country's thanks both for their participation in today's event, but also for their willingness to step forward and offer their time to contribute to the inter-American human rights system, which for Canada is an extremely important element of the organization's work. I have 2 questions this morning, but one actually I think was largely already asked by my colleague Marco Ponce of Ecuador, which is essentially views from the candidates on how to strengthen the work of the Commission in light of COVID-19. COVID's had an impact on women and girls in particular, also vulnerable populations too. And I'd be grateful for views from candidates on how they see strengthening the Commission's work in that context, and perhaps in light of the constraints that exist resource-wise in that context as well. My second question, and a couple of candidates have touched on this theme, but my second question is on Indigenous peoples and the rights of Indigenous peoples. For Canada, reconciliation is a priority for us, and I'd be very interested in views of candidates on how they would see working to promote and to protect the rights of Indigenous peoples. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Adsett, for your intervention. I would now like to give the floor to Alejandro Ordóñez, the permanent representative of Colombia. Please, Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours. Ambassador, if you could please turn on your microphone and camera. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The questions that the Colombia delegation presents are the following. First, what mistakes do you recognize as commissioners regarding huge facts of misinformation using social media in the context of the protests and breaches to human rights, and what self-regulatory measures do you foresee as candidates should you be elected? That this question includes the institutional accounts of the IACHR and personally the personal accounts of the members of the Commission, both current and future ones. My second question, on the maxim that we should protect the independence of the Commission, how do you believe that we should avoid the influence of interests which are not in the mandates? In other words, a conflict of interest and the obligations taken on by the member states in the context of the contributions to the non-regular fund of the Commission. Those are the 2 questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador. The floor now goes to the representative of Argentina, Maria Cecilia Villarra. Please, the floor is yours. Madam Representative of the Argentine Republic, are you connected? She is connected. She has left. Let's wait for her to request the floor again, please. So in this case, I think we can continue with the list. Going on to the next person who has requested the floor. And we, as soon as the connection is reestablished, the permanent representative of Guatemala, Ambassador Rita Lucioli. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It has been a great pleasure to be able to receive the candidates for the Commission on Human Rights who have met the delegations in order to be able to have direct access to their positions, and above all, to be able to get to know them on a personal nature, or even using this new form of a virtual meeting which technology provides us. I would like, Mr. Chair, to present to the candidates 3 questions. The first, leaving aside the deadlines established in the rules of the Commission, what is granted to the state in order to be able to answer requests for information or to issue comments for specific press releases that have already seen an increase in 24 hours and that continue to be very short, especially bearing in mind the very complex machine that the states represent. Therefore, my question is if you consider that you would be able to work more to improve this aspect, increasing time, and also the possibility of including in these communications the arguments that the states present on those topics. And a second question, and which is related to a topic which has been mentioned by the candidates to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights and the candidates regarding the independence in exercising their roles. And as a board, they generally make decisions as a majority regarding their resolutions and their reports. But in light of this independence and transparency which they should have in their decision-making within the Commission, I ask, what is it that the candidates would be willing to do in order that when there is a vote or an opinion which diverges from a resolution or a report, that this opinion be published? That would be my second question. And the third and last is the Commission has been repeatedly mentioned that it favors ideological and political interests of certain trends, leaving aside the objectiveness of their decisions. What could the Commission do to change this perception? Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Those are my questions. And above all, beforehand, I'd like to thank the candidates for their answers. Thank you very much, Madam Representative of Guatemala. We already have the representative of Argentina connected, Maria Cecilia Villarga. So we would now like to give her the floor. If you could kindly request the floor, please. No, but continues to have a connection. We give her the floor and she gets disconnected. It seems that there is an issue, so we will still be awaiting for the presentation of Ms. Villarga, and therefore we can continue and give the floor to the permanent representative of Mexico, Ambassador Luz Baños. Luz Helena, please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mexico gives much importance to the IACHR as an independent organization and autonomous in the Inter-American System of Human Rights. My delegation thanks and recognizes the presentations made by the candidates to members of this commission. Expressing their opinions, proposals, and initiatives which they should be elected is a very valuable analytical exercise which offers the member states bigger elements in comparison to be able to compare their candidacies. My delegation would like to make 3 quick questions. The first is, which would be the guiding principle of the priorities for the strategic plan which is currently being presented in the IACHR? Third, what are the public policies in terms of human rights which you would consider could strengthen in an urgent manner to see the reality which comes from the sanitary crisis? And 3, do you consider that it's convenient to have periodic campaigns to share the activities of the IACHR at a local level of a government to improve institutional capacity for the states to respond from this level of government? Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Madam Representative of Mexico. And I would like to ask the Secretariat if the representative from Argentina is already connected. Yes. Maria Cecilia Villarga, please, the floor is yours. She continues with problems. Okay. We are appointing a technician to help us, Mr. Chair. So now I'd like to give the floor to the representative of Brazil, Mr. Alvin Nunes. The floor is yours. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. ASG, good morning to all. I would like, first of all, to greet the candidates to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and I would like to, above all, to thank, on behalf of the Brazil mission, this chair for organizing this very important meeting, and in which we member states are able to hear the proposals of the candidates of the IACHR. Many questions my delegation would like to ask have already been asked by other brother nations. Therefore, I would only like to emphasize that the candidates please identify the main challenge the IACHR will have at this current moment and possibilities to solve and to face this challenge. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Mr. ASG. Thank you very much, Mr. Representative of Brazil. I would now like to give the floor to the representative of Paraguay, Raul Martinez. Please, the floor is yours. Mr. Chair, thank you very much. We would also like to thank the candidates for their presentations, which have been very enlightening. I have 2 specific questions, and some possibly have already been answered by some of the candidates, but we would like to hear from all the following. What opinion do you have regarding the promotion of the use of inter-American standards which have not been approved by the member states in binding instruments? This is a first. And the second is, what opinion do you have on the activities currently held by the IACHR in terms of the activities in terms of social media, and in your opinion, what should be changed? Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Representative of Paraguay. I don't know, once again, I'd like to ask the Secretariat if a representative of Argentina is already connected. Maria Cecilia Villarra. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Oh, sorry, please. Sorry for my connection issues, but I don't know what happened. I changed my device now. First of all, my delegation would like to thank you for calling this meeting, and also to thank the presentations made by the candidates. And we have as a general question, which is linked to the measures that the Commission has taken regarding the approach, both of the cases as well as the petitions, such as may be the case to reduce the delay in the proceedings or to see the impact report, which is something which took place very recently, just a few months ago. So we would like to know the opinions of the candidates regarding these measures taken, and if they consider that other types of measures should be taken. And finally, my delegation wants to support the Committee of Argentina to the Inter-American System of Human Rights and to its entities, both to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, as well as the Commission. Wish you all the candidates much luck, and thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Maria Cecilia. And now I'd like to give the floor to the Deputy Representative of Peru. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The presentations which have been made by the candidates to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, we would like to thank them for them, and I'd like to make three very direct questions. The first is, what aspect of the work of the IACHR do you believe should be improved or changed? The second question is, what contribution would you make to the activities of the Commission in a complex context, taking into account the increase in poverty and the political and social conflicts which the pandemic has raised? And the third and last question, Mr. Chair, is, what role do you believe that the Commission should have in terms of promoting and protecting human rights in the most vulnerable groups which have been specifically affected because of the pandemic? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Representative of Peru. I would now like to give the floor to the representative of Bolivia, Hector Arce, please. Hector, the floor is yours. Good morning, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to greet you and the ASG. First of all, we'd like to congratulate and thank the candidates for their presentations. They're all brilliant and all very eloquent. And our commitment as the plurinational state of Bolivia is to continue to work in order to strengthen the Inter-American System of Human Rights through the Inter-American Court and above all of the Commission. We believe, Mr. Chair, that the Inter-American System is a way of a weakness the states have had at protecting their human rights, and that's why we need to get to this international level, and in most cases with excellent results. This is why our commitment within the Organization of American States, we have something which is truly important to highlight and to congratulate the functioning of the Inter-American System for the protection of human rights. In this sense, Mr. Chair, I have three very concrete questions. The first is on something which has been mentioned here, which is how do our candidates, how would they guarantee, in the case if they are elected, obviously, how would they be able to guarantee the full independence of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights? The key for the functioning of this nature is its absolute independence, its interdependence, including an independence for an administrative nature for us to not see the situations which have recently taken place. full independence included in the other entities of the organization, and obviously also including the Secretariat, in order to be able to exercise a role which is jurisdictional, with a strong relationship to the San Jose Pact, to the Inter-American Charter, without any form of pressure which could exist. The second question is a question which is very concrete. What opinion do our candidates have in the interdisciplinary groups of experts? There were 3 cases: Mexico, Nicaragua, and more recently in my country, in Bolivia, which had great results. And I'd like to know, what is the opinion that you have on this logic of generating these working groups, these international groups of specialists who work for the development, which are done independently, but within the framework of the IACHR. And the last question, Mr. Chair, if you allow me, is related to one of the biggest problems that all the system for the settlement of disputes and managing justice, the great delay that exists in the proceedings. At a moment as the General Attorney of the State and of the Minister of Justice of Bolivia, to see that proceeding since the beginning of a petition, for example, until the final report to go on to the next stage, can sometimes take many years. And this has obviously generated a form of permanent dilation in the proceedings and in the requests which are made within the Commission. What do you suggest, what ideas do our candidates have in order to be able to bring more speed to the proceedings and to the cases and to the procedures which are held within the IACHR? Those are questions, and once again, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Hector. And now I'd like to give the floor to the permanent representative of Barbados. Noel, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, Mr. President, Assistant Secretary General, Excellencies all, and of course the candidates. Mr. President, thank you very much for convening, and the Secretariat for convening this very important session that we get to know these candidates for the Inter-American Human Rights Commission that Barbados believes is an integral pillar of the development of our societies in the Americas. We want to congratulate all of the candidates who we believe are eminently qualified to be on the commission. It is our contention that the English-speaking Caribbean should have more of extensive representation on bodies like the Commission within the Inter-American system. And therefore, Barbados has presented an excellent candidate that is eminently qualified to be a commissioner. Ms. Roberta Clark, an accomplished Caribbean jurist, activist, and international civil servant, has more than 30 years dedicated professional service in terms of advocacy and activism related to women's rights, sexual and reproductive rights, halting the spread of HIV, and ending all forms of discrimination and violence against women and girls, and socioeconomic justice matters. We believe that she is eminently qualified and has proven ability to make a significant contribution to the Inter-American Human Rights Court's efforts to meet this unprecedented moment in history. Moreover, we believe that her demonstrated leadership in translating human rights norms into policy will help to advance the Commission's quest to secure more rights for more people in the Americas. I have one question, sir. Does the Commission have a wider advisory role to play in calling out some of the blatant human rights abuses that are so obvious in societies within the Americas, rather than a major focus on the petitions that come before it? Does this Commission have a wider role, advisory role to play in all of the human rights abuses that are so obviously before us and are never really discussed in the general public domain? Thank you, sir, very much.
Thank you very much. Permanent representative of Chile has the floor. Ambassador Court. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would also like to greet the ASG and Mr. Mendez. Mr. Chairman, we truly appreciate each and every candidate who has offered a brilliant presentation, and particularly I would like to greet the proposal from the representative from our country who reaffirms the importance and the strict commitment of Chile with the inter-American human rights system and also shows a face for women. A general question for our speakers. The COVID-19 pandemic has showed shortcomings across the board. Do you believe in terms of human rights in this hemisphere in a process after the pandemic? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. With this last set of comments for this round, we would like to thank the permanent representatives for their comments and questions. In this regard, then, let's move on to the last item on the agenda, which has to do with the replies. As we said at the very beginning of the session, in this segment, each candidate will be able to take the floor for no more than 7 minutes. Thus, I should like to give the floor to you, dear candidates, and ask you move ahead with your comments for your final replies. Mexico has the floor. Joel Hernandez. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And thanks very much to the distinguished delegation for their questions. I will group the questions together so I can answer generally and speak to the country that made the question. There are 5 different groups. The first has to do with knowing what would be the role of the Commission in the world post-pandemic, and particularly in the light of how hard hit our countries have had. To answer this question, I would look at 2 points. First, to know what the mandate the Commission has in keeping with its instruments. And second, this is also very important, what are the capacities that the Commission has to fulfill its mandate? I don't want to overlook these points, given the work that the Commission has to do. The work that the Commission has is based on its petition and its cooperation and technical assistance and monitoring the situations. I think that that's where all of the efforts should be focused to be able to deal with the pandemic and its consequences. It's very important first to look at the development of inter-American standards when it comes to economic, social, cultural, and environmental rights as regards to people that have been hard hit by the pandemic. And the Commission thus has published and had press releases on the pandemic that reflect the different components of international human rights and that have been translated in how to deal with this. In the post-pandemic world, we should strengthen the standards that have already been accepted for cultural, economic, and human rights. And this should be done with a view to having an impact in states so that there will be no politicization of public policies and so that the most affected groups hard hit by the pandemic can be cared for. We have to be able to support those groups of people that have been hard hit, but also contribute with technical assistance for those states, and so that they can develop their public policies. And then lastly, the main role of the Commission is in Article 46. That is to say, create a consensus on the current situations. And that's where the Commission has to step in to monitor the human rights post-pandemic. Second, when it comes to independence that has been raised many times, financial independence would point to underscoring having a commission that deals with the regular fund that is sustainable and ongoing so that the main functions can be carried out. We come to the conclusion that the work has to be realized, but it's crucial that these monetary contributions are in keeping with the strategic plan. Only insofar as these things are aligned can the mandates be carried out based on the contributions and in dealing with the backlogs. The system of the policy of communication is also very important, and this is a concern that I have. The Commission has drafted standards to communicate with the press conferences or for the press conferences. And valuable comments of states must be objective. Precisely, we have to do more when it comes to criteria on this social point. We have to also be able to manage all that we have, and this points to the bylaws of the Commission, which point to the obligations of the commissioners themselves and what they have to do when managing personal accounts as well, or personal accountability. And then we have to look at the Commission and the average time devoted, which is 5 years. We are talking about a time frame so that the Commission has many more measures, and it has to bear that in mind. But it's important for the Commission to also adopt criteria which are iconic, that are going to be able to make changes through measures taken. And I'm concluding, or coming to the end of my time, but the Commission has developed its mechanisms very effectively, and I think it's important to bear in mind 2 points. First, the will of the state, so that it can work together in meting out justice. And then, secondly, more integration with the members of the highest moral levels when it comes to human rights. Judges continue to be a complement to the efforts that are made. Thank you very much. Congressman Nunn from Colombia has the floor. Your Excellencies, thank you very much for these questions. I'm going to speak first to the topics that the Commission should do, the protests, and then the 5 different points that were made as to the efficacy of the Commission. First, I would like to prize this, and this has to do with Brazil, Canada, Mexico, the United States, and Chile's questions. The main topic today is the pandemic, but we have to look at the vaccination and access as well as to social rights, because the pandemic has made our countries move backwards. Also, I think it's important to have the support of care for the most vulnerable populations, particularly children and adolescents, so that they can be connected and can be in their schools so that they can move on with their educational processes. Climate change and migration are of first order. And here we have to emphasize what the Ambassador of Canada said with regards to the protection of indigenous populations, particularly given the extractive economies of our countries and the relationship with those people. Now, how can we broach these topics? What should the Commission do when it comes to human rights? And how can the Commission lead the way? There are mechanisms for cooperation, and it should spearhead the drafting of public policies. And then the second point has to do with the role of the commissioners. It's not just to do with the strategies, but also within the framework of everything that is done, as pointed out by the delegate from Mexico. The Commission has to emphasize its skills and technical assistance. And also, I wanted to speak to another point put by the Ambassador of Barbados, catalyzing public policies in English.
Can become an institution that can catalyze, incentivize the creation of public policies suitable to answer the human rights problems in the continent. Con esto voy a mi tercer.
And that is why I'm going to my third point, and this has to do with due process. Uruguay, Colombia, Peru, and Guatemala spoke to this. The first point is that, of course, the Commission has to deal equally and give reasonable times to the victims and civil society and to states to be able to defend those. There has to be transparency when one speaks, and there also has to do with the publication of the Commissioner's work and the publication of all of the press communiques and the arguments that states put. The second point, the Commission and all commissioners have to be impartial and independent, not only states and the OAS system, but also civil society, particularly civil society. And this independence should also be seen in the financing and the accountability of the system. The system cannot be such that the Commission of Human Rights loses its logic and neutrality. The only point of the Commission should be the defense of inter-American human rights conventions and the Constitution, the inter-American constitutions. Social networks. Well, here I would look and speak to caution. First, social networks, social media. Speak to some of the interests, and people might want to prejudge, but it might lead to improvisation or a lack of objectivity and rigor, which oftentimes could not be in keeping with certain communications. So we need to have the evidence, and of course, these are the broad strokes of what the Inter-American Human Rights Commission should do. Now, a fourth point that I don't want to forget has to do with the accountability of the system. And here I would like to refer to the question put by Uruguay on the standards, and of course, the role that the ICHR should play in the jurisdiction of the conventions and the framework of conventions. And these should be rigorous in terms of their sources. It's not legitimate for any imposition of standards, and logically, that don't derive from the inter-American system's human rights sources or at the source. And then the Ambassador of Bolivia put a point as well, and this has to do with opening up the resource that I defend. A lot of voices, all voices, including the voice of a committee of independent experts. The more arguments we can have on the table and the more voices, leads to transparency. All of the parties can give their opinion, which makes the decisions for everybody more reasonable for all cases. And the sixth point has to do with the efficiency of the Commission's work. And this has to do with the comments of Argentina and Bolivia. I recognize the strategic line and the points have been strengthened. Nonetheless, I would like to insist on something. First, it is necessary for the Commission to avail itself of the mechanisms and artificial intelligence, not just to push through cases, but also to become aware of the factors that are involved in human rights that can lead to public policies and to spearhead public policies in the different countries. And then, of course, prioritization. Prioritization. The Inter-American system should make a priority and prioritize by dialoguing, conversing. And this should also be open and transparent.
The voice of the Caribbean. I totally agree with Mr. Ambassador Excellency of Barbados that the voice of the Caribbean should be raised within the system. My honest view is that the Commission should learn from the experience and the traditions of the Commonwealth model of constitutionalism for the sake of improving the threshold of protection of human rights in our hemisphere. Muchas gracias a todos y con
Thank you very much, and with that I round off my replies to the questions. Thank you very much. Antonio Urijola has the floor. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the questions. First, there are lots, but first, I'd like to focus on the pandemic and the effects of the pandemic when it comes to human rights. The other candidates who spoke before me spoke to this, and also there is no shadow of a doubt that one of the main challenges that the Commission has or will have in the next 4 years are the effects of the pandemic, particularly for those who are most vulnerable, and that has deepened inequality in the region and the extreme poverty as well. From this standpoint, I think that climate change, migration, the issue of vaccines and universal access to vaccines, the access to internet has been pointed to, and the public debates that we've seen in the last few years are challenges that the pandemic has left in our hands and that the Commission should deal with. And everything that has to do with economic, social, cultural, and environmental rights, particularly for children and adolescents and women. From this standpoint, these are the main challenges of the Commission, and we'd like to grapple with them and confront them head-on through permanent ongoing dialogue with states and all who are stakeholders in the system. We cannot confront the pandemic unless we do it together through public policies with a human rights approach. And building public policies, this is where the Commission is going to be crucial, and that's where the cooperation of the Commission is going to be crucial. Another topic which is of concern, the progress of authoritarian systems, and there is the need to strengthen the institutionality of the democratic systems and the rule of law. And also there we have to work hand in hand in a democratic environment so that we can take on these challenges. The issue of the pandemic that I just pointed out and the system of the progress made with the authoritarian system, it's important to strengthen the rule of law. And I think that these are the main pillars of the next strategic plan. And that's why the strategic plan has to be with us working together hand in hand for civil society, with academia, using the previous strategic plan. This is going to be crucial to hear the voice of everybody, but also there's no shadow of a doubt. I think that this is going to be crucial in the next set of work that the Commission does and where we all come together. Now, on this part, I agree with the other candidate, and that is that the Commission should continue to strengthen its standards when it comes to economic, social, cultural, and environmental rights, climate change. This is fundamental, it's crucial, and we also have to look at standards when it comes to strengthening human rights. An essential or crucial role is technical cooperation that the Commission has when its role, not only looking at public officials. It's really very important to work with all of the branches of the state and the constitutions. Everybody participates when it comes to public policies, and as such, then we can generate capacity building of all civil servants. And other mechanisms that we have created in the last few years are also very important. Obviously, this has to take into account the context and the realities and the work. The work has been very important, particularly in going along with what states doing in internal capacity building. And this is really very important because it avoids situations that we don't want. Now, as far as communication, we have made progress in the Commission in generate a policy through a dialogue with states, and we have to continue along that tack. Things change because relationships change because of the internet, and therefore we have to use the network. As I also said in my previous comments, a crucial point, there's no shadow of a doubt about this, is how we deal with the vulnerabilities, how we're going to work with the vulnerable groups. And there the Ambassador of Canada pointed to Indigenous peoples, and I think that it's vital to continue to make progress when it comes to individual and collective rights of Indigenous peoples through prior informed consultations, but particularly a fundamental vital role is the cultural dialogue. And this is an issue that has to be on the agenda of all states, to understand that the relationship with Indigenous peoples is an institutional dialogue for equality of all positions. Now, as to national mechanism for human rights for women, adolescents, and children, I think that the way of getting closer to this, once again, is through working with the people, through capacity building, through dialogue, and furthermore, through mechanisms that point to autonomy, transparency, and accountability, but particularly with these mechanisms that defend human rights. And now, with regards to other points for the Commission, this was underscored by the Commission this year. Progress was made, but it continues to be a problem. And then the need to look at some cases to continue with technical assistance by the state, facilitating dialogue between all of these stakeholders so that we can come up with friendly solutions when it comes to settlement of differences. And then the autonomy of the Commission. Well, obviously the independence, economic, financial independence is crucial, and it is a guiding light. And also the autonomy of the Commission is not just has to do with the state, but also in terms of organizing civil society. This is another very important point. And how do we ensure this autonomy? We're first looking at our own resources and guaranteeing our work without any interference. And then the mandates. We have a very simple mandate that guides us, and that is crucial. Let me just conclude by speaking about some of the ideological points, and I think that the Commission doesn't have any ideology. We comply with our mandate, and this mandate has to do with defending the rights of all people, no matter who they are, and when the violations are there and people have to be protected. We have to deal with things that are not comfortable, but we should never renounce dialogue with the state. And this is the mandate of the Commission. There is no ideological point. We're not looking at any political line of member states or of the victims. We have a mandate that we have to comply with and fulfill. And this mandate, oftentimes, is to denounce that which is uncomfortable, but we should never renounce or step back on a dialogue with the various actors in the state, and obviously with the other stakeholders in the system, such as civil society organizations and the victims. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mrs. Orejola. Barbados has the floor.
Thanks always to the delegations for those robust and challenging questions. And I think those are questions that also are on the minds of our populations across the region. I want to speak to 3 or 4 sets of questions. One, on the impact of COVID and the role of the Commission. Secondly, on responses to the impact of COVID on women and girls. Thirdly, the issue of rights, advancing rights of Indigenous peoples. Fourthly, a little bit of a strategic plan approach. And lastly, the response on equal treatment of member states in relation to the role of the Commission. So it has been said so many times over the last year and a half, COVID, the pandemic, the global pandemic, has sort of exacerbated all of the inequalities within our societies and also opened up new fault lines in our democracy, in our social cohesion. In fact, it has broken down social cohesion in rather dramatic ways in many countries. We know that the poor have gotten poorer. There are studies from the Caribbean that show that those who with the lowest income lost the majority of their income, over 70% of their income, those who are in the lowest quintiles, whereas those who have the most lost the least. So inequality is exacerbated, poverty is exacerbated. We know everywhere in the world, certainly in Latin America and the Caribbean and in North America, violence against women and girls reports have increased as women are locked at home because of mobility restrictions with their abusers. That's also, and children who are not in schools, don't have access to devices for online schools. So all of the inequalities of society have also been exacerbated. We are going to feel the impact of this for a long time. In fact, if I start to talk about the impact of school closures on children, on teenagers, I think I perhaps may not stop, but it is a crisis that we have to be thinking about. And then, of course, we've had the loss of jobs and livelihoods. The vulnerability is also at the level of states. All of our states have lost revenue, but think if you are in an open, dependent, externally oriented economy, dependent on services such as tourism, as are the majority of Caribbean countries, these countries have lost over 40 to 50% of their revenue going into 2 years. And they need that revenue to guarantee socioeconomic rights, education, universal health care, social protection, all of those things. So really huge impacts, we would even say catastrophic. What is the role of the Commission? I think, and it comes back to all of the concerns of member states delegates here around the role of the Commission being an independent one, or you know, trying to reinforce the independence of the Commission. Because if the Commission is truly independent, it also has a certain amount of authority, legitimacy, and credibility in using its voice. And that is so important, because the other thing about COVID and social media is that we know now that we have great divisions in trust and mistrust within our populations. And it's that mistrust that is driving unequal access to vaccines. So the Commission's role is so important. Their voice is so important because it's a voice of legitimacy. It's a voice of credibility, but it must be a voice based in evidence and not just in ideology. And I think that that has been the role of the Commission historically, to do the research, to do the documentation, to raise the alert. So all of that must continue. And then, of course, the Commission must help in developing public policies, particularly around approaching socioeconomic rights or helping member states realize their obligations. I want to also say that the Commission has a particular voice now, and that voice has to be used, for example, around the question of fiscal space of the member states. The Commission should ensure in its interactions with the Inter-American Development Bank, with the World Bank, with the IMF, that those banks understand the impact on human rights and the capacity of states to meet their obligations because of the revenue deficits. Should the Commission be thinking about and investigating issues of indebtedness and its impact on states, use its voice for thinking about debt concession, debt relief, debt erasure even? I think that the voice of the Commission, based on evidence, is important. And of course, bringing the voices of member states and civil society along with it. It has a role to play in thinking about equitable interconnectedness and multilateral solidarity. It has a really big role. I feel so very strongly about that, to use its voice in that way. I also want to speak quickly about the violence against women, which we know has increased. I think the Commission can help member states think about how you use the technology to ensure access to justice in a timely way, how police have to adjust their working methods, and that's the kind of public policy advice the Commission can give based on the expertise of those of its members. What kind of policing makes sense in the context of mobility restrictions where people are stuck at home, where the police themselves are also responding to time and resource allocation issues. I think the role of the Commission here is to be an advocate, but also to connect the dots. We know the question of violence against women and girls is a global issue. Certainly, it's a regional issue, and it's important for member states to understand it's not isolated to one state or the other, and that the Commission can bring together member states to share practices. I think that's a big role, and I do agree that the the commission should be speaking to communities, not just to bureaucrats or public servants. I think that the ambassador from Mexico spoke about that. Should we have campaigns? I do agree. Somehow we have to find a way. The commission's work has to percolate down to communities. I want to speak about the indigenous rights of indigenous people. I think that certainly we have to start by acknowledgement of harm. We have to account for the harm done and continuing. We have to apologize for harm done and continuing, and we have to repair. And thinking about what that repair looks like, it's about voice, autonomy. People speak for themselves. We make sure that indigenous people speak for themselves. They are involved in all decision making. They have the authority over the allocation of resources to meet the needs of their people. And importantly, yes, they're involved in decision making and there are resources available to repair. I think that reparation is so critical. The ambassador from Barbados raises the question of how do we speak. I understand, Ambassador, you're asking how do we speak to maybe powerful states, or how do we ensure that the Commission pays equal attention to the gravity of harms. And I think you will see embedded in the Commission's procedures, and also even in the Declaration and in the Convention, there is an expectation and a requirement for the Commission to be independent and to speak truth to power and to use its powers proactively. So the Commission can even issue precautionary measures on its own initiation. So I think it's really for member states to raise this issue so that the Commission is fully reflective. But it does seem to me that the Commission has been, having an equal, even hand looking at many of the complex issues in the region. But I think it's important to call attention to that. And finally, on the strategic plan, the last strategic plan was a very good one. The 5 priorities, I think, remain priorities, but all of this now has to be thought through the prism of the impacts of COVID, and there's no way around that. So I think one of those priorities remain,
¿no?
but we have to be specific to COVID. So thank you very much. I hope to join the crown jewel of the inter-American system.
Gracias. Thank you so much, Miss. La señora Alejandra Huneus.
Ms. Alejandra Huneus from the United States, please. The floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Yes. Well, thank you, ambassadors, for this rich array of questions. I'm also going to cluster the questions, focusing first on independence and autonomy, then on the more specific procedural questions, particularly backlog and delay and use of social media, and then return to the question of the priorities, which seems to me so fundamental. First, the independence and autonomy of the Commission. I said earlier, this has to be the most important focus of the commissioners, always, constantly fought for. Commissioners have to do this, especially at this time when many governments around the world, including in our region, are reconsidering their commitments to international human rights bodies, questioning their authority, or even denouncing treaties and institutions. Further, the Commission is emerging from a period of perceived incursion into the autonomy of the Commission, and the way to respond to these constant threats and to fortify the autonomy and independence isn't through isolation and separation. It can seem ironic, but the best way for an international institution to secure its autonomy is through strategic engagement with the actors that can support and insulate the Commission from political pressures. So the Commission has to work closely with stakeholders, with states, and have rich venues of dialogue with states and civil society, particularly in these moments of attacks, to keep its independence through its alliances. Second, the Commission has to hew to the highest juridical standards, to procedural standards, to insulate itself from calls for commissioners to resign or for calls that it's being biased in its execution of its mandate. The best way to counter the perception of bias and partisanship is for the Commission to stick to the highest juridical standards. And third, I believe we have to make sure that the commissioners that are appointed are neutral. And I'd like to emphasize that I come from neutral background, I come from the academy, and that my work has always been focused on the Inter-American Commission and how to keep all of the rights within the American Convention and within the Declaration of Rights of the Americas being sustained by the states. Second, I would like to speak to the questions of backlog and delay. The Inter-American Commission has for many years now had this persistent problem where cases can take up to 10 years in its petition cases system to reach resolution. This is, of course, unacceptable and completely undermines the sense of efficacy of the Commission, and litigants might go elsewhere. So the legitimacy of the institution really depends on it being timely in its response and it's in giving justice. The caseload of the Commission now is something that the Commission, as it's constructed, can handle in a timely way. I do not believe this is a problem that it cannot handle with the resources that it has and with the staff that it has. The Commission, there's many different proposals on the table. Over the past few months, I've been talking to different stakeholders, and the different proposals are all within reach. There are ways to streamline the current system of handling cases so that fewer lawyers are dedicated to one case throughout the time it's in the Commission. There are ways to emphasize friendly settlements. There's many propositions on the table. The way to actually get one of these on the propositions in place and executing it is for the Commission to work with the different stakeholders, with the litigants before the Commission, so the states and the civil society, and get their buy-in to the solution that it chooses. I trust that this is going to be a centerpiece of the strategic plan that is currently in development for the coming years, and look forward to working closely with the Commission and civil society to make this a priority. I would like to speak also to the procedural question and the internal institutional question of the use of social media. The social media is an incredibly powerful tool, and that's why it's become contentious in this context. Twitter is an incredibly powerful tool. We've seen this when political leaders understand this, and the Commission shouldn't renounce the use of Twitter and other social media. It should use them strategically and wisely. We need, in the Inter-American system, the Inter-American Commission, a protocol, a system of rules that we can use in order to dictate how commissioners and other actors use social media. We might, in the United States and universities, run into questions of whether this is an infringement of freedom of expression of, for example, commissioners. I don't believe this is the case. I think commissioners have a higher duty to the Commission, and I would certainly, were I to become commissioner, hew to the standards that the Commission would set in order to have a reasonable, responsible, and studied use of social media. Turning to the important question of the priorities, I believe that in my statement earlier, I made clear that my emphases would be on the rights of the most vulnerable groups in the wake of the pandemic. And this includes the rights of women, the rights of Indigenous peoples that were raised throughout this conversation. And here I'd like to say the Inter-American Commission, both in the area of the rights of women and the rights of Indigenous people, has been groundbreaking. And it can continue to be so if the Commission prioritizes the protection of those vulnerable groups in the wake of the pandemic. Here I'd like to emphasize the Commission is a quasi-juridical body. It has its cases and petitions system, so it must take all comers. But it is also a body that can set priorities, and it works the best when commissioners are able to have shared set priorities, and that these priorities are across all of the different working methods of the Commission. The work on the rights of women, for example, the Cotton Fields case, the case of Jessica Gonzalez in the United States, having to do with violence against women, are the product of concerted efforts within the Commission, working through all its different channels to advance the rights of the most protected and vulnerable groups. And this is the vision that I have for the Commission moving forward. It should have a restricted set of priorities that it can advance forward through all of its working methods, and that will make it the most effective and impactful body.
Muchas gracias, señora Alejandra Uneus. Hemos entonces
Thank you very much, Ms. Alejandra Huneus. So now we have finished this extraordinary meeting of the Permanent Council, which I think was extraordinary because we have been able to hear excellent candidates, all of them with great merits for the position which they are candidating themselves for, positions which will be defined during the next GA in November. The General Assembly of Guatemala for one renewed America. So we have fulfilled the mandate of this Resolution 2941, and this extraordinary meeting will be in the minutes of the meeting. This is a very good opportunity to remind all the representatives, the permanent representatives, that we have a session scheduled of an organization which is very similar to this one, which we will be concluding on Wednesday, the 29th of September, in which we will receive the candidates to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights with the same methodology as the one which we have applied this session. Likewise, I would like to remind you that on Thursday, the 30th of September, in other words, 8 days from today, we shall have an extraordinary meeting of a very important reach for the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact in the hemisphere in which we belong to, as well as the aspect of preparing joint policies for us to be able to face the huge challenge of COVID-19. In this event, we will have different personalities of the member states. And naturally, we would like to invite all permanent representatives which may still not have their participation of their respective countries participating, for them to do so as quickly as possible. Having said this, and thanking all those attending for their participation, this meeting is adjourned.